Is your Excel workbook unbreakable? Well, if it isn't, I've got 5 pillars that are going to help you create your unbreakable workbook. Other people can use it and not break it, and you can use it over and over and over again. Let's have a look at how you can create your unbreakable workbook. Let's go, shall we? So today we will be exploring the concept of an unbreakable workbook. Now, an unbreakable workbook is something that allows you to share your work with others, to make it so they can use it safely without actually breaking what work you put into it, such as formulas, structure, formatting, and so on. Now, these 5 pillars are the things we can employ to go a long way to making our workbooks unbreakable. Firstly, we have tables, input validation, separating our data, error handling, and finally, what most people would know about already is workbook protection. Let's kick off with tables, and we'll see how tables can assist in making our workbooks unbreakable. I hope many of you, if not all, are using tables right now. If you aren't, please start using tables. And here is some good reasons why. Firstly, in modern Excel, dynamic ranges are the key to creating usable workbooks that grow and shrink as required so that you don't have to worry about redefining formula ranges. So a dynamic range is created every time you create a table so that the data you refer to in these columns will shrink and grow as new data comes in or old data comes out. Secondly, any formulas you create are now created as what's called structured references, meaning they are using plain language and makes a formula easier to read, that the headings that you have in your columns are used to help navigate in the table. Another reason is the use of slices, and slices can help enormously when it comes to finding out insights into your data, some analytics and reporting. And it allows you to not have to worry about any of the filtering because that's already been set up. So your users would appreciate it as well. And another one is that the table can be the brain, if you like, that holds all of the data. Now, that's holding the data inside the workbook because that data might come from a Power Query, or it's used to directly feed pivot tables, charts, and dashboards. So having it in a table allows all of that to happen really efficiently. And from an aesthetic point of view, you are also auto formatting your table when you use tables, and that saves some time. So it gives you a repeatable look that you can have consistency to your work. Now, I have a tutorial on creating and using tables. I'll leave a link on this screen somewhere around abouts, but I'll also leave a link in the description so you can look at it after watching this video. Okay, so we haven't got this created as a table yet. This is just simply a formatted group of cells. So what we're going to do is to work on creating it as a table. Now, one of the precursors to that is not having any blank rows that are entirely blank or entirely blank columns, because this next technique we're going to employ will mean that we need at least some contiguous or mostly contiguous ranges of data. So 2 ways we can create a table. One is directly here from the Home tab, Format as Table, and we can choose a format that we want to do so. But there is a shorter, much easier way to do that, and using a Control key function, Control T for table, and you'll see that we have the marquee surrounding our data, and it is also detecting across the top our headers that we have as well. So we want to indicate that as our table range with our table headers included. Click OK, and you'll see immediately we've got all of the data has been formatted. We've also got these little drop downs for sorting and filtering our data. Awesome stuff. But we can also, as we saw, filter data with our slices that we can create as well. And if we come down to the bottom of our workbook, it's quite lengthy. And you can see down the bottom right hand corner, we have this little icon indicating the end of the table. Now I'm just going to add a couple of quick little entries here. We won't do it in totals. So Pete Smith might do as a name. And Melanie Andrews. Now, those 2 employees are now in, and you saw one beautiful thing happen, and that was the table has grown to incorporate these 2 new people. And I can, of course, add the rest of the data, and that means as well that any functions or formulas relating to this data, such as a sum total of our years worked or something like that, will now have automatically updated. And that's what we mean here, that the dynamic ranges allow our formulas to expand when new data is added. So that is an awesome feature of using a table. So I'll just do a quick little sum off to the right hand side here. So equals sum, open bracket. And if you'll notice my mouse pointer shape, when I have that little black arrow, click that, and that's now, trust me, selected the entire years worked columns data. And you can see it's using the text from the column heading to describe what we're summing in this function. So wonderful stuff. That's the structured reference in play. And if we add more people down to the bottom of our spreadsheet, let's get a quick look down there. And Paul Federici, enter. That's added another 12607, and you'll see up the top here that has also grown as well. So that is the best part of using tables. So it's structured in such a way that people can use it with some confidence. And most importantly, I didn't need to adjust that range of cells. So one less interfering option taken away from the potential to break our spreadsheet formulas. That's tables in a nutshell. As I said, I've got another tutorial that goes into a lot more depth about that. But let's move on to our next topic, input validation. And likewise, with this topic, this pillar of input validation, I'm sure many of you will have heard of or have been familiar with data validation. And one of the common ones that is used is to validate data from a list from a range. Now let's have a look at some of the choices for data validation. Now, if you aren't sure how to get to it, it's from the Data tab. And in the Data Tools area, we have Data Validation. And if we choose to drop down the list and choose it, we then have the dialog box where we can make our setting as to what to allow. Now, of course, the first thing, it's set to by default to allow any value. So therefore, anything is permitted to be entered in the range of cells that you're trying to control, to limit. Then, when we drop down the list, you'll see here are the other choices of what we can restrict. And firstly, we have a whole number, such as 25, where that's all we will accept. Now, let's have a look at what whole number options there are, where we can specify that the data must be between, not between, equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to this range of numbers. Now, they could also be just referenced in your workbook from a cell. So that's the whole number. And very similarly, we have a decimal option, which has the same things that we can restrict between, minimum and maximum values, and the list that everyone hopefully has been exposed to, if not created themselves. So we can create an in-cell drop-down, little arrow, a lot of people call it, where we present the data from a source, which is generally somewhere on the spreadsheet. So that's a very cool way to do things so that you're limiting people to a list of cells, data, inputs that they can't change. And we can see how we can do that later on. That's lists. And then the next one is dates. Now, dates, again, you can have a range of dates and they can be greater than, less than, and all of the options. And that will reflect the regional settings of your computer. Similarly, time is another, very similar to dates, where we're going to start and end time. Very useful if you're timing experiments or sports performances, things of that nature, where time is of the essence, or manufacturing time limits, all sorts of applications. And following time, we then have text length, where we can say that the length must be between a certain range of characters, if you like. So that could be some sort of coding or something of that nature, where you don't want the coding to have had a little mishap where someone's entered an extra 1 or 2 characters. And the final one in that list of things is the custom one. Now, I've got a little example down here. Let's just cancel out of that. So it's a formula that you specify. You apply it to one cell, and then, of course, it will be copied to the rest of the range of cells that you're applying it to. So here is an example that the cell E25 is greater than today. And if that's the case, we get a response of true. Now, if it's not the case, let's make it 24th, it will be false. So that's what's in the background of the data validation. It's doing a test, and it applies to all the others as well, that the test will say, is this statement true? Is this range of cells or this range of numbers between X and Y that I'm trying to test for? If it's true, I'll let it through. If it's false, I won't. So that's what happens with these custom formulas as well. So very useful one to have a little tinker with if you haven't already. Right, so that's a little bit about tightening what people can enter into your spreadsheet based upon data validation settings. So whilst it's been around for quite a time, it's still just as valid as ever. Pardon the pun. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. The pillar of data separation is where your applications become more professional using worksheets, of which you can have quite a few, using worksheets to separate the parts of your workbook application so that you are not mixing formula pages that you might not wish others to access away from input areas where you do. And of course, the output is where you can display your results. So, for example, on the inputs page here, that could be where your tables are, where people might physically be allowed to enter data into your spreadsheets. And on a calculations page, well, this is somewhere you probably don't want people to be, where you've got large complex formulas that do perform some actions that will produce your outputs, being some final pivot tables or dashboards, charts, other sort of reports or data. Locating them all on a output page will make presenting to management or your colleagues a lot easier at the end of the day. So you might also add some other sheets. It depends on the size of your application and complexity for that matter. So you might have an instructions page right up front, introducing your users to the workbook, the assumptions that are in there, and some instructions about where to go to enter and run the show. And you might also want to have, say at the end, some versioning or update page where you list what versions you have had, date them and so on, and include a little brief description of what was modified. So you run yourself a small audit on the changes so that you know what you might need to undo if something goes a bit awry. And in a larger organization, you might have a page where you have links to some useful resources and contact details for the users. So if they've got any questions about how to use your workbook application. And the use of the tabs to separate these sections of your workbook using color to create sections. So you might have many input pages. You might have things for quarterly or monthly or what have you. You create a section colorized with inputs, and then each of those other pages for the incremental dates or months and what other input pages you have, they can be the same color. So they all sit well together. And then the calculations get another color and so on. Use of color from right-clicking the tab, if indeed you don't know already, and choosing tab color. And you can choose from all the colors that are possible, so you can get some really cool variations. I like to say have a darker green and a lighter green for the sub pages, or same with the blue, or a grey. That can work sometimes as well. So you can be creative, but also informative, because at a glance you can tell, hey, that's my green sheet, that's where I input stuff, that's good to go. I'll click that tab. Separating data from other aspects of your application, your workbook application, can go a long way to protecting and isolating the bits away from each other so your workbook doesn't get broken. Okay, Let's have a look at our next pillar. Now, error handling is not a very fun task, but we can go a long way to do something about them. So when we're creating our spreadsheets, our workbooks, we have three things we can do, three options when it comes to errors. We can fix them, that's fine. We can have our workbook alert us to them, and we can also prevent them. Some useful functions in attacking those options I've got presented here. So is error, and that is simply requiring a source, which is this error over here. Now it will return a true if there is an error in that cell. Now some of these, like I've used this one, is NA multiple times, particularly when it comes to if statements where if X and Y blah 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 is an error which you wrap around your logical test, then you do X, otherwise you do the formula. Okay, so it's very similar to what something we can see coming up. So is error works very similarly to is err. So that's just going to do a test and true or false on that one. Now, your data, you might not want to have blanks in it. So for example, if we take this cell here, which has a 0 at the moment, delete what's in there, the result now should be and is true. So that cell F14 is now blank. Now you may not want blanks, or you may want blanks. So your test logic will be based around that. And we can test to see if something actually is a formula, is a number, or is text. So that, in this case, is this a formula? No, it's not. It's simply the number 52. Is this a number? Not at the moment. But if I put it back as a number, there we go. Now this one here, is this text? Yes, true. So all very similar in their way they work. Now if error and if NA work a bit differently. So this one here, if error and its compadre if NA, they will test to see in general terms if there is an error, and the if NA will only be testing to see if there is an NA, a not available error. So in this case, if there's an error in F22, yes there is, we produce something, and in this case we're just flagging it with a something ain't right in a text. Note the double quotes. Similarly here, if there is a not available error in F24, we're going to produce the same thing. Similarly, in quotes, there is an NA error here. Now those errors could be, as I said earlier, captured or handled in a way inside a formula. Here we can put some alerts on the top of a sheet. So in this case here, if C8 equals true, then 1, otherwise blank. So where we have an error, it's going to produce a 1 result. And similarly, we can just put it in as text as well. So if C8 equals true, there is an error in the sheet, double quotes, otherwise good would appear in that text, such as we have here. Okay, so if C16 equals true, then error in sheet, otherwise good. So we've got a false, so it's good in that case. Now these numeric results though can all be added up, like over here, And with a conditional format placed on that particular cell, that can really highlight to us before we go presenting this spreadsheet to management that there is a host of errors in there and we better do something about them. Okay, so a couple of ways we can handle it. In a formula, during the data entry, or post where we get alerted to the fact that we've got some errors in a couple of ways there. Alrighty, so hope you like that one. Let's hop on to the next one, protection. So our final pillar in our quest for our Unbreakable workbook is something which many people may have already come across, and that is using the various protection elements that are inside Excel. So just to review or introduce, in our defensive design, we can physically stop things happening in a spreadsheet. And by that I mean, by default, every cell in a workbook is locked. It just hasn't been switched on to stop entries being put into cells. So you can unlock certain cells by selecting them and going to the Format Cells Protection tab and ticking Locked off. So an unlocked cell, when we then turn on protection, activates the locked cells. So the unlocked ones are the ones where you can enter data. So let's have a look at our next section. And that is when we've got our unlocked cells, we are turning on the protection. So from the Review tab, you'll note here Protect Sheet, and that is what enables the cells locked function to happen. Now, the first two options when we come to Protect Sheet, you can see here, are firstly creating a password. Now, passwords come with a few risks, and we do have a couple of areas where we can add passwords, but if you forget your password, you will not be able to easily, in fact, you may not even be able to recover that workbook, particularly through Excel. It doesn't remember your passwords. It just simply knows how to unlock them with the right password. So I do not recommend or not recommend passwords for sheets, but be wary of those particular issues. So the first two options are that you can select lock cells or select unlock cells if you're the user, and that's, in most cases, could be okay. You might want to turn off that first option though, so that they can't even select a locked cell to see into it. Then we have a whole host of other options which basically allow users to do certain things or not by leaving them unchecked. That is particularly a lot of formatting, inserting columns and rows, putting hyperlinks in, deleting rows and columns, doing any sorting, using the auto filter, using the pivot tables and charts, editing objects, editing scenarios. Scenarios being a fairly complex-ish sort of calculation or way to present data in different variants, if you like. So you can turn off all of those things by just leaving them alone, or you can selectively choose things that people can do in your spreadsheet. All right, so our next topic of exploration is going one step further, and that is not just protecting the worksheet, but protecting the entire workbook. And what you have here is an option simply of one thing, and that is to protect the structure. So that prevents users from doing things to worksheets. So adding, moving, deleting, hiding, and renaming sheets, you can protect using this option here, Protect Workbook. You'll note there's a grayed out option that says Windows. Now that is there to have some backward compatibility where previous versions of Excel would create little child windows for each spreadsheet. So that's not the case in my one. So it's grayed out. It's not required. And once again, we had the possibility of adding a password. Same thing applies. This doesn't have the ability to recover it in Excel. You might face a bit of difficulty if you want to remember a forgotten password. So unless you store your passwords in a nice place where you can recall them, go ahead, but I don't recommend or not recommend using passwords because of the trouble you can get into. Now, our next area is the ability to then have all of this stuff that we've just created for an Unbreakable spreadsheet to go one step further. And this is better than protecting them with passwords, I believe. In some ways, and that is creating a template from that workbook. So what you need to do to get that to happen is to basically have no data in, but just all of the controls and formatting and all of the steps you've taken without data, just as an pristine, unused spreadsheet workbook thing. Right, so what you would do first though is save off that file in a safe location. And that way you've got your original file that isn't a template saved away so you can come back to that. So that's a recommendation straight off the bat. Now, so prior to all that, if you do want to use a template, you have to have a location to save it so that it will be recognized by Excel. So you can create your own personal template location. And from the File command, choosing Options and then the Save tab here in Options, locating the Save Workbook section, which is actually up the top, and then there's this option here, the location you would put your path to save your templates to. And when you place a template in that path, you'll be able to make use of it from the File New command. So to carry on, when you have a workbook that you've already stored away to a safe location, but you now want to make it a template, ensuring there's no data in it, select File, Save a Copy. Type a name that makes sense for that template, and here's the important part. The type of file must be saved as an Excel template, which has the extension of XLTX. And then you click Save. Now, where you're saving it to, of course, is your template location. And note, if you have some macros in it, you must save the template as an Excel macro-enabled template, which has the extension of XLTN. N for macro, of course. Now, with that saved in your personal template location, when you come to select File New, you'll see the option of Office or Personal Templates. Now, under Personal, that's where your template should now appear. When you click on it and it's open, you will see the number 1 added to the workbook templates name in Excel. And if in that current session you open another one, it will have the number 2 added, and so on and so on. So that location allows you to see your personal templates that you can open and use from scratch and fill in all of your data again. Now, if you need to make some substantial change to the actual model and how it works, you would have to create a new template and save that in the same manner. Okay, so a very cool way to have your really great workbook application structured and strong and potentially unbreakable, saved and repurposed every time you need to create a new version of that file. Okay, so I wish you luck in the task of creating your Unbreakable workbook, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.